We're recording. Here we are.
Welcome
to episode something or other of the Fat. We're fucking terrible at counting this. We've got a fucking shitty light too. This has very much like a rape dungeon chic to this whole like the tripod in the corner.
I've never been in one before.
Well, welcome
That's
to the
Duncan.
party, fuckface.
That's Duncan Velgamond.
Who I do know. So
Welcome to the podcast and welcome to the Lansdowne, Mr. Luke Burgess.
thank you very much.
How you going?
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah,
Considering
all things considered.
all things considered.
That.
Yeah, I mean, being a strange time. And everyone in sort of different scenarios.
Where were you when it all fucking when the shit? We won't talk. We'll talk a bit about fucking COVID. Yeah, I don't know about this light. But where were you when it all happened? When we locked down?
In Tassie.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long?
That's home. That's still home.
It's still home. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just outside of Hobart, on a farm.
Whereabouts?
In Penna, which is about half an hour out of Hobart towards Richmond. It's
Beautiful.
On a 200-acre farm.
Really?
Top of a hill,
It's a big farm.
Mate.
It's a big farm.
I got 88 acres and just about 3 hours north of here, and that's a large amount of land to consider.
Well, 80 of those acres is in the covenant, which is protected for eagles and other wildlife.
Yeah.
There as well.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
And what's the other 120 odd?
Rolling hills and about a 7-acre garden, productive vegetable garden.
And is that your little corner of the world?
Tony Shearer is the farmer who runs it, who used to supply us at the restaurant, an old friend.
Yeah.
But I've been living on site there for a couple of years, sort of helping out when I can and being involved in aspects of it. But
cool.
He's
What
the
a beautiful
mastermind
life.
behind that. I'll tell you what, in lockdown it wasn't too hard because you had to choose to see people, really.
Yeah, and you've got an element of purpose, which a lot of people really, struggled with through this time. A lot of people, especially in our game, losing their jobs, and sitting at home with nothing but especially in an apartment in Sydney. It's a difficult fucking way to do lockdown as opposed to looking at an eagle and tilling a garden.
It is. And I think, like even if you were in lockdown in Hobart or a place like that, it was still reasonably easy to get outside into something that was resembling a friend's backyard. Or, it wasn't that sort of inner city sort of tight lockdown and confined spaces.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing. Like, we've both got kids, and you would have. I did this fucking weird little photo shoot with somebody, and they were like, "You write something on your hand," and showed up, and I was like, I just wrote, "A trampoline saved my life," because I got a fucking trampoline for Luna before she just like it was for her birthday. Her birthday's like in early April. And I swear to fucking God, without it, we would have gone mad.
Yeah.
But I've got a backyard to take a fucking
we got
trampoline.
swings.
Being in an apartment through this time in Sydney with kids would have just been fucking brutal. It'd be interesting to see how the people kind of consume this time internally over the next few months and coming out of it emotionally. Because I think there's going to be I think the term PTSD probably gets thrown around a little too willy-nilly, but there's going to be a degree of trauma from this fucking
It's just
time.
that idea of like being. I did one of these float tank things once. Like as a kid, I got a 3-part thing. I did one. I meant to go back. I just haven't. Obviously, didn't love it that much. But they give you sort of warnings before you go in that some people sort of suffer emotionally or can get really sort of stuck in their own head, and it's like not traumatic. You're in there for like 60 minutes or 10 if you want to be, but like that idea of just being left alone with your thoughts. A lot of people can't deal with it, and I think that's a similar scenario when you're talking 3 months, even though it's in an apartment. It's you're gonna.
I heard of people going fucking mental on like meditation retreats. Same deal. Just like fucking just losing their
when
shit.
you don't talk or whatever.
Yeah, just because they're just coming face to face, which I think is. I mean, that's kind of what we're here to talk about. Like, we just dive straight in. Like, Lukey, the reason I specifically wanted to ask you to come on the podcast is because there was a few interactions that happened in the COVID lockdown where some of our beautiful friends and colleagues in the hospitality industry kind of created this WhatsApp group, which was, I think, a beautiful idea, and it was quite short-lived in its kind of conversation and connection. But your voice was very clear to me about your it felt like you had an understanding of what was unfolding before or as it was unfolding, which was a very rare thing for most people in that scenario. I'm not talking about the specifics of, like the government, rollout and assistance schemes, but more about where we were sitting at this point in history. And I suppose we're interested in kind of knowing what your take on is. Where are we right now? What is this pandemic a symptom of in a wider kind of context, and specifically in our tiny little corner of the world? Because I know that there's a lot to digest and talk about when we could get into the rabbit hole of capitalism, etc., which let's go in there at some point. But I'd like to tease out a little bit for the people who will know you from your hospo life and your incredible kind of contribution to it. But from our little corner of the world in hospitality, where do you see it going? So, I mean, that's a pretty fucking big one.
Yeah.
Luke the Saviour Burgess.
Luckily, just got to do memory
start
card.
where you want and let's fucking just chime in. But pick a topic and let's just talk.
Look, I think for me, one fortunate thing that I have had in the last decade to 15 years, after leaving Sydney and relocating to Hobart, I happened to find myself in the company of older people, people who've lived through many other experiences in their lives in all different parts of the world and the country. And, early 30s, being thrust into this whole other range of discussion and I guess focus on other matters. There was less distraction. I think, this is just pre-smartphones and whatnot, and I think we live in a very distracted age. And so we always sat around dinner tables and talked about really deep and conflicting ideas. Things that were like, utopian or dystopian or potentially what could happen scenarios. Involved sometimes a lot of wine and a bit of, weird predictions. But the main thing was to take the knowledge of people who lived, for an extra 30 years than me and had much more of an idea of what I was going through at that time, that it wasn't the first time it had been experienced. So, spending time with a colleague who's a retired law professor and philosopher who made wine, who, was involved in prison reform and gay rights and deaths in custody 30, 40 years ago, and following a narrative about, the concept of being free and the wage slave and all this sort of stuff over dinner was new to me.
This was all new to you at this time when you were being exposed to it?
Fragments of it, yeah. But it was very interesting to actually just sit and listen. So say nothing, actually absorb. And to be honest, like a lot of the things we've been speaking about for the last decade are kind of coming to fruition now.
Yeah.
And fruition's not really the word you want to use.
No.
But at the end of the day, I find it extremely interesting that one of the best things about my career is it hasn't just been focused on one thing. It started off that way, went off into photography, came back into cooking, did a bit of farming, and I've sort of split my interests up so that I can actually spend the time gathering in more information and thinking critically about things and just sort of trying to understand why things happen and how they occur. And I think, there's the importance of listening to people who are experts or really knowledgeable in their area is really coming to the fore now, as we can see that we've got a bunch of leaders around the world who are, dismissing expertise. And
it's such a crisis, the idea that
what's the point of becoming anyone who knows anything,
I was listening to a podcast with a fellow named Eric Weinstein, and he's a fascinating dude. But one of his kind of critiques is on his bugbears is on academia and just the state of it and the role of it in the current society and the fact that it's kind of being taken over by fucking businessmen rather than like philosophers and professional academics. But forget all that kind of aside, his kind of major thing was, if this had been 40 years ago, the first place they would have gone in history if COVID had have happened, they would have gone to the universities and said, what are we going to do?
Exactly, yeah.
What are we going to do? And instead, they've not even been consulted as far, like there was one little thing I saw where a group of statisticians and epidemiologists got together and did one little report. But other than that, there's just nothing.
But it gets dismissed because it doesn't make anyone any money.
Well, they're no longer impartial. I mean, all the endowments for the Ivy League universities in the US are heavily invested in stocks, in companies
Yeah.
that then plow them for all their intellectual property.
Yeah.
You know, UC Davis, all these sort of universities became a harvesting field for corporations to take great ideas, commodify them,
Yeah.
and make them marketable and saleable
Yeah.
ideas, concepts, inventions. So the universities have been bought. I mean, when Dirk was teaching at the UNSW in the law faculty.
And that's Dirk Muir.
Yeah. So basically he was told in the late 80s that, he's going to be evaluated for excellence. And that basically meant he had to be rated and ranked and basically tested as to whether he was actually teaching people at a certain level, and that people had to be passed based on the fact that they were paying a certain amount of money.
And this is
Late 80s,
anathema to
and so
success.
when he resigned in protest in the late 90s,
Yeah.
he was a pariah amongst his colleagues. Basically,
It's crazy.
But now they're all looking at him saying, "Yeah, we've been done.
Yeah.
We've been stood."
That idea.
We've been hoodwinked by the thing that we all believed in. The only reason that we kind of went down the path is because we believed in it so greatly, but blindly at the same time.
They
It's
can't
scary.
even we touched on it earlier before this started, like talking about
No, we don't talk before podcast, Kenny Graham.
Yeah, we've never met before.
We would never do that.
The coming up with the vaccination and how it's, Luke mentioned the quickest vaccination in history prior was like 4 years, and we're trying to rush something through now. But that idea of even when it comes to when it becomes available, or it's like it's proven to work, like who's gonna make it? Because the people with the capabilities of making it just want to make a fucking shit ton of money out of it.
Well,
So
it's a
sort of,
weapon.
you're
It's
just
a
going to sort
weapon.
of rinse the governments for more money. Like, it's insane that level of commercialism will still stand in the way of us looking after people as human beings. But it's where we are.
That vaccine will be the equivalent of a performance-enhancing drug.
Yeah, like fucking.
It will be.
What do you mean by that?
Well, basically, whoever can get their hands on it is going to
Yeah.
be so far ahead.
Yeah,
They
right.
will use it to their advantage, like a nuclear weapon.
Or
It's a weapon.
or presidents will use it to sort of,
Yeah.
we're going to hold that back from you. If it comes from America, we're like, we're going to
Leverage.
hold that back from you until you sort of do what we want you to do.
I mean, the fact that
We're getting fucking dark, and but I love it, and I'm not trying to steer us away from it. But can I ask you a question regarding? Do you think that there's institutions that aren't broken? Do you think that there's things that exist still that don't require a fucking fundamental rethink that exists in culture, in Western culture, which is where we're sitting? And we can even be specific in Australia. I think, we've got a couple of things that are up our sleeve in Australia that we have over the United States, healthcare, social welfare system that seems to be working to some degree, especially in comparison. But it sounds to me like, or it looks to me like we're riding through a period of fucking crisis that sits right before. There's stages within paradigm shifts. Everyone's heard that term paradigm shift, right? And one of the stages, there's 5 stages to it, evidently, before the new paradigm is kind of adopted by a culture. And one of the middle stages is crisis. And it feels like there's just a fundamental breakdown of things that are so at the core of what makes society, but they're so fucking fundamentally broken that
We'd expect
it's almost hopeless.
Stages 4 and 5 would be to latch on to the humanistic elements. To
Well, there's
improve.
adoption, and then there's the fucking full shift.
See, that really depends on your exposure. So for some people, their lives have been in crisis for their whole life.
100%.
Depending on where you live,
That's great, yeah.
what your background is, who your parents were, what country you're in, what, trade agreements have been written, what other treaties have been organised. So what we're experiencing now is a common crisis for most people. But it's not like we're all entering it at the same time. Some people are saying, hey, welcome to the space we've been occupying. And I finished reading a book that I thought was very interesting.
Get the fuck out of here. Who is it? Hello? It's Reese. Oh, hey, Reese. We're doing a podcast, you fuck. I'll let you in, you fucking cocksucker.
One of the production boys. Sorry, Luke.
Sorry, Luke.
That's all right, mate.
We'll fucking lumbast this cunt.
Yeah, fair enough. Reese. That's Joel. That's a little intro. Oh, he's moving to the fucking Pac-A-Late. Little segue. I made a fucking utter fucking pig of myself at this beautiful man's incredible restaurant in what was it, 2013. Luna was, my daughter was like 4 months old or something. You know, it was my first holiday after we opened Mary's. So she would have been 6 months old. It was my birthday. It was in the September. And I ordered 2 bottles of fucking Pac-A-Late at the same time, side by side, and then continued to
Put them on his construction hat.
basically was
you,
that,
you
right?
left something out though. You went to lunch at the Stackings and got destroyed.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I turned up. Yeah.
Turn up hammered.
I turned up.
Classic
It was on my birthday, and it was classic Smitho fucking behaviour. David Moore got me fucking hammered, and then I turned up for dinner. It was going to be the most glorious day of eating and drinking ever, and I fucking ruined it.
We thought it was.
I cooked it.
He filmed it.
So that moment of levity in the middle of a serious conversation. The book you were just talking about. The book.
So there was a book called Stuffed and Starved, written about 10 years ago by Raj Patel, about how we've never had more food and we've never had much more disparity between the people who have more than they need and the people who don't have enough.
Yeah.
So there's a publisher called Verso Books. Mike Davis writes for them. Very interesting stuff. And they brought out a book, Raj and a guy called Jason Moore, called A History of the World in 7 Cheap Things. And it's short by I guess, comparison to lots of these other texts. But essentially what they say is this. We have a category of 7 things: cheap nature, cheap money, cheap work, cheap care, cheap food, cheap energy, cheap lives. And if you want to really boil down everything we're talking about, it all links to that. And it goes back to the end of feudalism and the beginning of capitalism. And if you look at how we've been managed, it's all about making things seem accessible, manageable, with enough distraction to then manipulate all the other systems that help capital keep labour in its place. And, you know, it's not radical in that's like going to be truly controversial. It's just that it happens in ways that keeps us in this sort of equilibrium where there's not enough to make us want, but there's just enough to keep us in this holding pattern, this holding zone. And I think in the last 10 years, there's even more, I guess, that fuel they can add to their fire, which is, you know, the advent of the technology and information era, especially smartphones and all that sort of distraction. You know, it's really reshaping our brains, our cognitive behavior, and it's taking us away from the core issues, the core fundamental issues, which is why we have so much partisanship in politics. And really, people who have been made to feel like they've got to hold on to every little thing that they've got
because it's all they have
taken away.
And it's not
a mistake. It's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
It's a formula.
Yeah.
And some of it was realized during the process of this experiment of capitalism, but it actually is formulaic. So to change it, there's lots of things we can do. And there's lots of things happening right now in terms of, you know, the Black Lives Matters and Occupy Wall Street and all these sorts of movements of the last decade that we actually need to listen to make a fundamental change. But we all have to give something up to do that.
They also there's also a fear that those kind of ideas and those movements, which are so powerful and important, and they do mark time, but that they dig in the same way of what you're talking about, is they get co-opted by the exact thing that actually continues to create such a level of inequality, wealth inequality in the terms of Occupy Wall Street and Black Lives Matter. They get they're taken over, and the narrative gets changed ever so slightly and misdirected in a way that all of a sudden the argument is not around something very important. Like, for example, the most recent kind of conversation around Black Lives Matter has been mostly targeted around police violence and brutality. You know, sparking a generalized awareness of, you know, what some people will call systemic racism. But at some point, there seems to be this other cross dialogue that occurs, which just fucking hits it's like a stone that gets thrown, and then another fucking stone comes and just grazes it. It gets thrown by someone and just pushes it offline to a degree where no real fundamental striking change occurs, and it becomes very gradual. Like the moral arc of history is long, but it's also like
reference to the line is because it remains linear, remains horizontal, remains flat. It doesn't go vertical.
Yeah,
that's what it needs to do. These movements, they run out of steam. Black Lives Matters hasn't, but it is 585 years in the making.
Yeah. 100%.
It's.
I feel like we haven't
huge.
touched the edge of the outrage that should be felt by what the issues that are being raised.
If you look at everything in this book that I find interesting, says that basically to make capitalism function, you had to separate humanity from other key elements. One of them was nature. Okay, so humanity at that time, can you imagine, didn't refer to human beings; it referred to white men.
Yeah.
Anything else that wasn't part of humanity was there for commoditization and exploitation. So nature became slaves. Black people, women, trees, everything that you see around us, which can be converted into capital and the wealth created from that, you had to remove yourself and say it wasn't human, it wasn't part of humanity, and it wasn't part of a finite resource or connected to anything that you would feel emotionally remorseful about.
Well, that's what Marx was talking about when in his theory, in his kind of concept of alienation. I think when he's the role of industrialization. His critique was specifically around industrialization, and something I hadn't been aware of, and so thanks for bringing it to my attention. In the fact that there was the breakdown of feudalism that kind of really sparked a lot of this kind of the capital transfer. But in his critique of the industrialized state was the fact that there used to be these artisans who'd make a chair, and then all of a sudden there's one person on a fucking production line sanding a spindle that would go down the line, and then some person who had been disconnected from everything would put it all together. And it was the alienation of people from the work, aka the dehumanization that you're talking about, that actually was he saw would be one of the fundamental drivers to upsetting capitalism, why the workers would revolt. Now, we haven't seen it yet, but I don't think it's because he's wrong. I think that the story's just not played out yet.
No, it's still going. And I think also Naval Ravikant said that specialization is for insects, and when you're sanding that little back spindle that goes into the chair, you're specializing, and everyone's specializing in one component. Whereas the person who made the chair was a specialist, but they didn't just get the fulfillment from just making the chair. There was other things that brought them happiness, that brought them creativity, that brought them inspiration. Once you produced the production line, you took all that away.
Yeah.
And you forced people to be removed from the concept of creativity, of remunification without it being about money or finance. It's all about the sense of, I guess, a type of payment that doesn't come from a transaction, a financial transaction. And then basically the formation of the production line was primarily to put people into a position where their bargaining capacity within labour was quite heavily reduced because they weren't able to actually create anymore. They were just part of a mechanism to create components for an overall. And if you compare it to like Japanese knives, where one person makes the handle, one person sharpens the blade, one person makes the blade, it's kind of like that, but it's not.
It's a broken version of that because there's three people creating a whole, but within that, and we all know, and I think anyone who doesn't know about the Japanese obsession with perfection should go down that wormhole for themselves. But the idea that it's not a fucking handle. Yeah. It's someone's life's work.
They've tree, and they've gone to the tree, and they've cut the tree down, and blah blah blah.
Which is so different to getting a fucking piece of pine on a conveyor belt and being a part of a whole,
or form ply with marine glue.
Yeah.
I mean that's what we're talking about. It's all about efficiencies, right? Efficiencies.
So I mean, it's a kind of a striking kind of not anti-capitalist. Well, maybe it is anti-capitalist or a critique on capitalists that you're striking, but. And when people think about capitalism and they talk about its opposite, the inevitable, easy cheat answer is communism. which is problematic in its own right. You know,
Absolutely.
we've seen, you know, I'll make a statement out there, and I'm happy to be corrected, and I'm saying it not because I actually have a fully formed opinion on it, but just it's an opinion. But that capitalism has been responsible for the greatest uplift in human health and well-being out of any other system, any other economic history.
Of poverty.
Let's pull more people out of poverty and given them clean water and access to schools than any other economic system. That being said, we haven't had an alternative really running side by side as a dominant narrative in the globe. But we've also seen the fundamental breakdown of every single communist state that's ever been attempted.
Well, there was like some things that you said earlier that sort of the forming of humanity and how it very much became about white men. And at that point, you know, I wonder what the point was when, you know, surely there was a moment in time or any point of evolution where the white male, whatever, stood apart, but it was to provide for those people. And then at that point when that was broken and became about, was it a greed thing to just like, for me, gathering more wealth and commoditizing everything around me, like, and that's sort of what's spurred on commercialism, because it's like it's never stopped from that point when we made everything a commodity around us, women, people of different races, whatever.
Our own labor.
It's just like evolved to, you know, it'll always come back to that sort of, you know, democracy, like capitalism, because people can never have fucking enough, or like old fucking white men can never have enough.
The thing with that is that basically currency was linked to actual precious metals. When it moved away from that, and a lot of that had to do with discovery of alloys in Germany in the 15th century and, you know, printing money, we took away limits.
Yeah.
You know, if you had 1,000 kilos of gold and it was X amount per kilo, that's what you had. But when you start to create money and capital out of literally thin air, on agreed values and you know, future returns and stuff like that,
made up values.
What they had to create was frontiers. So once the frontier of any system is reached, you have to keep going, because capital needs a return, it needs a reinvestment.
Yeah.
Profit needs to find a home. Profit, by definition, is surplus, is waste. So you need to actually keep wasting to make more. Mm-hmm. And in the process, they had to consume what was around them, and then they had to create all this context for viewing that, be it people, be it nature. You know, and when you look at like frontiers, and we look at like why we've got this pandemic at the moment, is because we've gotten to the point of, we've pushed nature to such a point that we are now having a crossover that has come in the past, and there have been mass deaths as a result based on the geographical areas at the time, but we've reached that frontier again.
Yeah.
So the next frontier on top of that is now going into, you know, the virtual, information, technology, and space. And that's why you're seeing a push into those areas. That's why you're seeing such incredible valuation on the stocks in those companies, because that's the next frontier. And really, they lay waste to what comes before it.
In our own little corner of the world, I could not agree more with that appraisal of things. Beautifully said. And in our little corner of the world, restaurants to me are a fucking surplus on society. It's you know, the majority of restaurants, especially the restaurants that, when we little fucking hospo nerds get together and talk about our favorite restaurants, they are not required. They are a surplus to requirement. They
were at a point in terms of like the whole premise around Michelin Guide and stuff was about when you're traveling, like things to stop. Like when you go to Lyon, like it's all about, it was on the silk trade route. And it was a place for people not from the area to be fed. Like they served a purpose, where now it's about
for sure
opulent spending and going out
and
move beyond
disposable income
to over capitalizing, egotism and vanity.
Yes.
And that's you know, and that's, you kind of have to have a little bit of that to go into that business, I think. And it's not always misguided.
We've got a little bit of it, yeah.
It's not misguided. A little bit is okay.
It's difficult for me to kind of like it's an industry that I love so much. I'm glad we're getting onto it after kind of consuming or talking about everything else within, because this is the context that I wanted to discuss the hospitality in, which was with that what we've just talked about, the wider kind of thing. Actually, before we get in there, can I just round out something? Can I just I kind of asked that question or got to asking a question. He's pulling books out. Fucking yes. What do you see as a workaround or a viable system that that's an alternative to capitalism? And do you see something that's at work in the world, whether it be a small little part of the world, like, you know, a tiny nation state or an independent kind of operating kind of area that is representative of something that, you know, not utopian, but that's an improvement on where we are?
I mean, it's a very complex question, and I'm not an economist.
Well, you're welcome.
I'm not an economist, and I'm not a scientist, and I'm not a.
But you're very interesting,
But well
well-read,
read.
man, and you know what? I think that the 15 people that fucking listen to this will actually. There's something to be. I think your answer will be enlightening to me, and you know, fuck everyone else listening. I'm interested in your answer, Luke.
Thanks, buddy.
You're welcome.
I think that when we think of transactions, everything always comes down to the financial. And there was, and there always has been, to some people, a great emphasis on satisfaction in completing a task. You know, you're not requiring anything in return. Now, there's a friend that I help out in Hobart who runs. She's brilliant. She runs the kitchen at the Migrant Resource Centre, and I go there and pack boxes a couple of hours once a week when I can, and she said, "Oh no, we've got the money to pay if you wanted to send us an invoice." And I said, "Yeah, but what I am giving my time by you asking me to invoice it, you're commodifying my intentions." And I think that's a big issue, because when you always commodify and monetize something, you've always got this mindset of a transaction that needs to be met with some sort of duty. Mm-hmm. So once I give you an invoice and once you pay me, then I have a sense of duty that goes beyond altruism or kindness or just wanting to help out. And I think if we work backwards from the fact that we have far more than we need, most of us.
Yes.
The creation of debt that pushes us into this need to keep working the way we are could be restructured. And this is where sovereign states and governments have a lot more to contribute to not creating these massive debt bubbles that only, you know, show up in GDP figures and all the rest of it. It's actually saying this is enough, and from here we have to extend some of it to just being generous to each other, helpful, and also try and create a bit more equality. Not everyone is going to be on the same footing, and not everyone
genetically we're not like
No.
some people just take an IQ score. Like some people are really blessed to be far more bright than I.
But
So I don't want to rage against the machine at the fact that Luke got born with an IQ with an ability to consume data and the world more in a way that I
also
am.
as well, someone says
It's
to you, Jake,
an inevitability, you know what I
you
mean?
can be whatever you want, which
Yeah,
is
you
the biggest
can't.
lie ever. You know, aptitude, everything else. I mean, you can't be whatever you want.
No.
And if you think you can, you're deluded.
Yeah.
You actually have to grow into that person, I think, and that's the experience of life. And because life goes for a long time these days, we've got to actually look at our potentials. And I think a lot of people are marginalised and their potentials are never realised because they don't get the same opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So in this alternative system, you know, money isn't a terrible thing, but the way it's used is probably not in our best interest.
Yeah.
But the problem is that we have to create limits. The new system has to have limits.
I think that's an interesting point about the limitations. One of the things that kind of just popped up when you were talking about that is the undeniable role of the market in creating efficiencies, and I think that, you know, the idea of creating limits around where efficiencies actually become, where we seek to maximize efficiencies only to a point where they are maximizing human flourishing. There's got to be, and I'm not a mathematician. I'm not any type of anything. But the idea that there's got to be some sort of fucking graph that can be mapped where it's like there's a line where the efficiency that the markets create has to be stopped, because it's a monster that continually feeds itself on creating more and more and more efficiencies at at the cost of the
As an
people it's meant to
optimum,
serve.
and then
But also
move-
as well-
move
But
on
but
to
you know,
something.
the market's meant to serve the individual. You know, when you break it down, you look at it. What's it trying to do? We're the consumer. So without us, the market breaks down and disappears. If you think about it like a host and parasite kind of situation,
Yeah.
right? It's meant to serve us in a way, because without the parasite's not meant to kill the host. The host is meant to facilitate the parasite to. It's meant to be symbiotic, and the ones that aren't, they
Yeah.
Well,
that's
think of it
evolution
this
what
way,
it
fucking
was.
right? Think
crush
of it
it.
this way: when there's money to be made and it's privatized.
Yes,
When there's a loss,
it's government.
no, it's basically
Us.
socialized.
Yes. Socialized.
So it's already a corrupt system that does not wrap the person on the knuckles for taking a bad decision, and it's not shared evenly. I mean, to read you this is a perfect summarization of what I think everything's at. And the social struggles over nature, money, work, care, food, energy, and lives that attend the capitalist scene's paltry bones amount to a case for why the most iconic symbol of the modern era isn't the automobile or the smartphone, but the chicken nugget. And that's efficiency.
yeah.
That's efficiency.
Yeah.
And I think that's the wrong approach. But that's what we've been landed with.
You can imagine if it's like
It's very
that what you
insightful.
spoke about earlier, like when you know, giving up your time and not wanting it to be commoditized. Like if there was a shift of, we spoke earlier about sort of genetics, or like being 60% from your parents, 40% from environment. But imagine you give like 20% of your time that is not commoditized, or about, like, everyone in the world did that. Imagine what a different world it'd be, where it's not a, like this, and it was just a train of thought. I'm trying to think what would,
Like a
what
payment
would
in
cause,
kind. A
yeah,
payment in kind, because if you say to someone, but what do I do that's worth X amount to you, and why, and
yeah,
how do we exchange
it's a real
it?
mindset.
We've
to
got to look
stop
beyond
competing at that,
the numbers.
even about what you're doing for
You've got to
someone.
look at it as an emotional
Yeah.
transaction where you don't question what the value is in a monetary. We can't think beyond the numbers.
Yeah.
Does it make you feel good? Is that person going to benefit from your kindness? Are you going to
Well, this fits.
feel good after
This feeds back with the role that I think you raised. Well, I know you raised earlier, which is around the role of dehumanization to control capital. You know, once you divorce people from nature, once you divorce people from their work, that's fucking great wine, huh? Here we are talking about fucking all of these things, and we're drinking fucking some of the most rarefied, delicious natural wine on earth.
man.
But alongside Jack Daniels, but you know, like it's fucking made me the way
fucking so good.
train of thought.
Focus, Jake.
Yeah, I know.
Focus.
I know.
Or otherwise,
I
I
can't
actually
even
leave the
remember.
restaurant.
Again, I can't remember what I was saying.
I was going to suggest that, like, there's a like in the modern era. Well, it's not even that modern. In our generation's era, a pandemic is, it's basically even just, if you could say anything, it's ignited capitalism even more.
Yes.
It's like, with short of like extraterrestrial invasion of our planet, like what would make people stop giving a fuck about, like, that's because there's a thing that people kind of naturally come together in crisis to a degree at a real ground level, whether it's just you looking after your mum or your best mate or like vulnerable people around you in your community. Like there's that little essence of I should be a better person. It dissipates very quickly as sort of world comes back to normal. But I think if the planet had to compete against another, species or something altogether, maybe we'd like get our shit together and be like, we're better than this, people.
Well, I think in terms of like, people saying, are we all in this together? And the definitive answer is absolutely not.
Yeah.
But I mean, we don't really want to think of what it's going to take to make that happen, because it will be absolutely
unthinkable.
Absolutely catastrophic.
Yeah.
And you know that the people who have the billions are going to be the last ones to go and suffer the least. But I think, if you look at history and you look at how we are really just a blip on the whole line of the planet's existence and the universe and all the rest of it, if you believe in that. Yeah. This is a minute in a day, in a century, and I think that we place far too much importance on our egos and our I guess
legacy.
perceived intelligence. And we've got one foot in the grave. I'd be brutally honest with you, and the whole reason you're saying about communism not working the way it should and whatever is because humans are corruptible.
Yeah.
And I don't think as a species we have what it takes to survive long term.
The next step.
We're just too selfish.
I can't remember who it is, but there's the whole the conversation around, but basically the big full stop, and societies, when they're mapped out, how do they progress past certain stages, and we're kind of seen as a stage one, or not even a stage one kind of type one civilization, and type one is basically being able to use the full power of the earth and its surrounds. But the full power, and we're kind of on our way there. But then stage two or type two kind of civilization is able to use the fucking energy of the solar systems, fully, using, planet energy and stars, suns, etc. But there's these hiccups and these steps in between where it's most don't get from type 1 to type 2 because they just destroy themselves. And looking forward, it doesn't fill me with a great deal of hope. I am an internal optimist. I really am. And I think it's almost impossible to be a success in life in the life that is defined to us and that we receive when we're born without a level of optimism. It's very difficult difficult to maintain the motivation to wake up every day. But at the same time, looking forward, I look at it and go, fuck, if we do get from this point from point A to point B, do we really trust ourselves with being the fucking people who can actually harness the solar system or the galaxy? Or fucking, you know what? No, it's a terrifying idea that humans control the Crab Nebula or some shit. Fuck.
But it's the thing. It's not a good thought. Such an animalistic.
It's not a good thought.
It's such an animalistic trait, that idea of how selfish we are, and and little sprouts of people thinking other than themselves, as in moments like Black Lives Matter and Wall Street and all that, and all it's coming up against is huge fucking literally walls of the silent majority just telling everyone to get back down and fucking behave. Is that idea of when I was a kid. I remember thinking of when the EU was established and stuff, thinking people are getting on. You grew up with the history when you were young is world wars were not too far behind you, and now it's we're all sort of clubbing together now. This is a good thing. People are being accepted. Being gay is absolutely fucking fine now. It used to be illegal. We're getting somewhere, and now we hit 2020, and it's everyone, it was all bullshit. Let's go back to fucking 40 years ago again. That was what was the best then.
It's a complicated idea. I've listened to a podcast recently with a guy named Steven Pinker, and he's he's a social scientist and kind of thinker. I don't know what his exact credentials are, but basically he's done a lot of social work on and social studies on kind of the state of equality, and not just, I'm not talking about race, but mostly wealth. I think his work's been basically, we've never had it so good, and there's never been less inequality than there is now. It's been a case of the rising tides. And it's very interesting to listen to that perspective and then balance it with the fact that we're all sitting around here agreeing, and there's so many voices out there agreeing with the fact that something is fundamentally fucking broken. And it's almost like the mountain is unable to be climbed. Even though it's improving, it seems like the mountain's getting closer, but it's but we're not even at the fucking base of it yet. You were yet to actually start climbing the full picture. When you get to the bottom, when you look at a mountain from a long way away, it's achievable. When you get to the bottom of it, you can't see the top anymore.
But so we're trying to keep going up the same path instead of taking another route to the top. We're going for the same path all the time. Mm-hmm. And even if that means failure, it's the ego that commands us to do that. So when you talk about, controlling the Crab Nebula and all this sort of stuff, the problem is that we associate ownership with everything as opposed to custodianship. So custodianship would actually preserve this planet, and a very, very good example of that, are the first Australians, the Aboriginal people. Yeah. I mean, they managed to keep a land in relative harmony for over 40,000 years. In 220 years, we've totally ripped it apart. And the thing that they had that we didn't see was a complete relationship. And when we arrived to put the flag down and said we own this, is terra nullius, there's no fences here, we broke that long connection to the concept of custodianship.
Yeah.
And it became ownership based, and then it became commoditization. It became everything about what could be taken as opposed to what could be exchanged. And that's the problem. And that's why it will be impossible as humans to solve these issues. Of course, it's all about ownership. It's all about the capitalist mindset. It's all about taking what we need to satisfy those almost
hunger.
genetic traits now, because it's been that long.
It has been.
And Indigenous culture worldwide has a deep connection to,
The land.
I guess, the mystical side of things, the alchemy, not just the why it happens and this is the formula, but there's some things that are unexplained, and we respect that. And it's usually linked to nature.
Yeah.
And in the end now, it's really going to come down to, we're in the time of existentialism where we actually don't have a choice. We're there.
Yeah.
We are now going to be coming up against frontiers, which will be dictating the way we should be behaving, but the way we're led with the minds that we have, who have the influence and the money, they're just going to find a way to try and skirt it until the next frontier comes up, and the next one, and the next one. But nature is unrelenting and unforgiving. And essentially, unless we learn to work through the whole concept of what we think we control as opposed to what we can work with, we're pretty much fucked.
Yeah.
And that's where we are, people, in 2020. But
it's like you say, oh fuck, why do we say that? But actually, no one really wants to talk deeply about this.
But this is the only way that the problems like this get solved. The only way that Einstein actually solved the fucking had insights is because he admitted that he didn't know the fucking faintest, and he started from first principles of thinking about going, well, if it's fucking broken, or if I don't understand it, how do I learn about understanding this? How do I start understanding? And if without the admission of the fact that we are fucked, and that there's something broken, and that there's and that we're responsible for it, and that we're also, but there's an agency that allows us to actually fix it, and there's something within this human spirit. Like when I talk about the idea of optimism, I do have a fundamental, and it's misplaced, and this could be just completely a fucking narrative that's created to soothe me to sleep. But we can also see progression. We can also track progress, and I really hold on to the fact that there is something about humanity. Then we might have been divorced from it, we might have been separated from it for a little while, but we're not here in 2020 because humans are great capitalists. We're here because humanity has something to offer that's different, and it's sent us over certain leaps, evolutionary, and at the heart of it, I think, is community. It's not just a pack mentality, which is very strong and huge, but there's an added element of community that is very particular to and very nuanced about the human experience. And when it's removed, it's so fucking it's so deeply felt. Which is why I think, when you talk about the distracted age, I see it as a fundamental breakdown of community, of classic
And culture.
community and culture that has borne us through the last, 80, 100,000, 200,000 years. I'm not fucking, I'm not an evolutionary biologist.
At the heart of it, we're not
but
that different, but we have evolved in different places in the world with different cultures. And what the modern world wants us to do is homogenize all of that into one big sort of tappable, exploitable mass.
Yeah.
So it's an expansion of what happened 500, 1,000, 2,000 years ago. But I think what you say is very true. And it's not like you give up on the concept of humanity, but actually so many things have evolved in a certain way that we really just need to put the brakes on. We really need to put the brakes on and say, look, we're actually, if we want to have civilization and culture evolve, then we've got to really have a look at like what frontiers we're coming up against.
Yeah.
And I think like in this country, when the virus kicked off, Germany allocated 50 billion euros to its arts community.
Shut the fuck up. Really?
5,000 euros per person. And that could encompass artists, performers, musicians.
So someone who said, I'm an artist, and they put a grant in kind of vibe? Or
no, they didn't even have to put a grant in.
Or everyone just went, we'll give you
it was
$5,000
based on
to
the
buy
information the Germans collected. And so what they're saying, but that's what they're saying is that we value that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in this country, we don't value that enough.
No.
And what it comes back to, once again, is as an economist that I read recently said, Australia is a country of houses and holes.
Mm.
We dig
Mines.
holes, we build houses.
Yeah.
But what about the other things that we can't truly commodify that do bring in money for tourism but that keep the population happy, buoyant, educated, inspired? The singers, the writers, the painters.
The Harbour fucking Bridge,
mate.
like and the Opera House, like they're two architectural works, right? Hate them, love them. I don't give a fuck. I love both of them, but they make me smile and they make me feel a part of something that's bigger than me.
But look at the story behind the Opera House. Look at Utzon being sacked or resigning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we wanted someone to bring us something, to show us some culture, some inspiration, and then we fucking gave them the good old Australian boot up the arse. And said, we'll
not
take
good
over
enough.
from here, mate, and leave it to us. We've got it. And it's like, that
Yeah.
that now is an iconic gift. Like
It really is.
You look at it and think, we have to respect that. And I think the government has to put their money where their mouth is and support
Yeah.
all the, I guess, aspects of what contributes to this country that doesn't really show up as heavily on the GDP register as, Twiggy Forest and the cohort that.
but
it's evolved.
interestingly, the growth of hospitality and its associated parts over the last 20 years specifically, and I'll give it the moniker of the MasterChef effect, even though it's completely was well and truly established before that. But the idea, like there's been an explosion.
Do you know how many restaurants or cafes were around in the year 2000?
No fucking idea.
15,500.
How many now?
Last year, 52,500.
Fucking hell.
Now, do you think the revenue to support them has increased at the same rate?
No. Well,
Barriers to entry?
I think coronavirus is the number one thing that's actually shown up for the first time that the federal government had to take notice of hospitality as separate to tourism.
Yeah.
Because they've been lumped together for a long time. I actually wanted to ask the question just based on your comment on arts around. There's a hotly contested idea based on every chef with a fucking couple of tattoos and a fucking Japanese and some Japanese steel in their fucking knife rod that were artists. But do you think that there is some sort of conversation or correlation that can be made between what is offered in the hospitality space and the traditional arts community?
I think, I can say that my own personal journey in learning about art, culture, what came through going into the industry, where I started working wasn't particularly great. And I certainly didn't have that road to Damascus moment there. But within 2 or 3 years, people that I work with or had dated or whose friends had come into contact with me and took me into that world. And it set me on a path that if I didn't go into cooking and meet those people, I don't think I'd be where I am today because of that.
Yeah.
And certainly not because of my background. And so I'm forever in debt to that path, which some of it was, fortuitous. Other parts were like selected. But it actually created my connection to that world of art, that world of culture. And as my mum would have said growing up, it's arty-farty or it's fancy or it's gourmet or whatever. We've made it unachievable for some people because we've given it a label that makes it seem elitist, which has been applied to art, which has been applied to culture, which is really, that's actually like a class war. That's a position to make you feel like you can't be part of it when actually we should all be part of it.
Is that frustrating for you? Because to go to your restaurants that you had in the past. I ate at garages many years ago as well. And it's like, and there was definitely an artistry around that. But it comes back to like what you're doing now, like farming, the local community, and doing the simplest forms of things and using like old techniques. And you're going back to the sort of the real fundamentals of what cooking is. But capitalism has meant that they cost so much that you can't sell your dishes for $8. Like it's got to be $26. You can't pay the rent. Is that frustrating to you? Would you love to be able to do what you do and be able to like people can come out and for $40 like just smash everything on the menu?
I think if we're going to apply a capitalist mindset to it, let's put a dynamic pricing principle like airlines or flights. You want to eat on Friday or Saturday nights, you pay the premium. You want to come on a quiet Wednesday, you get the same product, not at the same price. Someone who'll say, I don't care, I'm happy to spend $150, I'll come Saturday. Someone might say, well, I can't get there, I can't spend $150, I'll spend $75. That's a way of sort of stratifying that access. Now, I've got to make the business work.
Yeah.
Am I saying that the product is worth the same at those two price points? Yes, because everything else is the same. But I also think that if you stratify your business and you give yourself a slice or give a slice of yourself to some different cohorts, that's one way of approaching it. But really, if you want to look at it, you know, it's all linked to personal debt and really like people willing to take that debt on. Like hospitality in Australia is fueled by the growth in equity and housing prices.
Yeah.
83% of our customers at garages at the end were paying on credit card.
Yeah. Really?
83%.
Wow.
Sometimes you wouldn't have enough cash to give them staff tips. You have to go to the bank and get it out of your account. And I think that says a lot about, you know, that's a perceived wealth, right?
Yeah.
That, to me, made me very nervous.
And they've been
most people are paying on future wealth, not what they have
just
now.
And that's what a big driver of that explosion. I didn't know the numbers. We just knew that it was fucked. But that explosion, it was definitely a large part of it was driven by property developers and like the much hated like food precincts, and they just they'd open up 10 of them in the space of a few months. I can't remember when I was a year or two after we opened Mary's, and there was a 6-month period when there was like 200 and something restaurants opened up in the sort of Sydney like metropolitan area.
All of them with a story.
Yeah, and it's I spoke to someone recently.
Yeah,
but I spoke to
100%.
someone recently about that, and it's like that idea of the developers using hospitality because there's a mystique around it, or media love it for whatever reason, so they're using these anchor brands or things and going to people that probably don't have the talent or the capability or the money, a fucking 100%, and saying, well, we'll give you a free in. Like it'll cost, like a restaurant might cost you $800,000 to fit it out from scratch, but they're like, well, $100,000, we'll do the rest. So all these people were taking on things that they were didn't really have the ability to do. So now we're just flooded with great chefs and good operators running half-assed venues because they don't really, it's not their money on the line.
No, but can you imagine that like the same sort of deregulated attitude was given to physiotherapists and lawyers and architects? I mean, there'd be buildings
Pilots.
falling down, people being locked up, broken backs.
We're having that in Sydney now, though.
With
certified.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
there's no
Certified.
shortcut
Yeah.
to learning
Okay,
a trade.
you can do
and
this
learning
law
what to
degree.
do.
I'll tell you, you only have to get like 45%.
I tell you what,
And I paid for it.
look, you don't have to get it all right, but if you fuck up, you're going to go to jail. Or you can just find someone who did better in your class and they might get you off.
Yeah, but they opened it up, and it's we got offered a few of those spots, and we've literally said no to all of it because we didn't want to be part. It's not. It's when restaurants are dictated by a hospitality deal, it's fucked.
When someone comes to you with that offer, automatically you're suspicious because you know what they want is what you do,
It's
right?
too good to be true.
But you're doing what you do.
Yeah.
So you are now becoming the commodity.
Exactly. That
and you
idea
are
of
the extraction.
anything
that
that's
profit
free,
for the capital
like
investment.
social media, when anything's free, you're the product. So when they're sort of saying, here, have a restaurant, like they're just trying to sell apartments or get people down based on the back of us. And remember, we got the first thing we ever got invited to do was Barangaroo. We were like flattered, I suppose. We went down to have a look. The conversation basically broke down. We're like, so if we turn the music up real loud, are you going to tell us to turn it down? And they were like, well, there's probably a level where right. It's like that doesn't work for what we
I'm
want
sure
to
you
do.
can make as much noise as you want down there. Right?
Yeah,
You can swing several cats down there.
Yeah, but that makes it sound a little.
I'll bet on that.
Like a little bit of a childish throw the cots out, the toys out of the cot kind of thing. Or if we can't play our music, but it's not. I was there with you, and the reason I'm just raising it is because it was a fucking signpost of a lack of agency, and like you said, someone wanting what we fucking fought for, what we built together with the community around us and our community of patrons who supported us while we were fucking up, while we weren't great, while we're still not great, while we're still trying to improve every day. But the idea that we're going to trade all that out for a fucking quick fix on something, on a fucking real estate deal.
Diluted version of.
But, I think at the core of it, for you and me, there was a lack of agency and a cheapening of what we'd achieved. There was a dollar figure which we knew was so far underneath what that lack of control would actually result in, and what it would truly mean. Not being able to turn the music up sounds like, if I can't turn the music up, I'm not going to do it. No. Not being able to turn the music up when you want to is not being free.
Exactly, and what you're saying as well is I'm not for sale. Not everything is for sale.
Not everything is for sale.
The problem is that people expect that in this day and age, everyone is willing to sell everything.
Yeah.
And if you're not,
sorry, did I just put that tantalizingly close? Did I give you the extra half-inch push? But
the shambles musing.
Fucking lazy. Yeah, get off your fucking ass and put it yourself. Lukey, I was one of the things that you raised in the kind of conversation in that WhatsApp group at the start. You started flicking some propaganda around, and one of them was around universal basic income, and I'm really interested in it, specifically the contradictions that the problems that I see personally within it, and just wanted to get your an opinion on it, basically. And my not my struggle, but what I think one of the things that I find interesting about the concept of it. And for those who don't know anything about universal basic income, maybe you can give them a little crash course on it. But one of the tensions that I see within it is the lack of self-actualization and self-esteem, and how it's a complicated thing when you just say, well, I'm going to give you enough money to buy all of your fruit and vegetables and pay your mortgage or a rent on a house somewhere in the country, and you might need to distribute, equally to go. Some people might move to farms, blah blah blah. If that's all that's the only income you're getting. But there is an alienation that occurs between somebody's work and worth, and how you see that interplaying.
So I was listening to Scott Ludlam on a podcast, and he mentioned a book he was reading. So it was quite lucid. So I bought it, and it was quite lucid. There was some really valuable information and points, but some things were just like, whoa, how can we advocate for that? So the whole concept behind
how can we advocate for UBI?
No. So basically, these guys were saying, full automation, zero employment.
It's coming.
So I'm sitting there in bed just thinking, whoa, like I'm trying to reason with this argument in my mind and think I just can't see it. I'm trying. It's not getting there. But it was good because it made me think about exactly what a universal basic income. I think the main word to focus on there is basic. Now, if you look at say New Start or Job Seeker and JobKeeper, they're a kind of UBI.
Yeah,
they're subsidising via wage payments of individuals. Now it's discriminatory and it's not universal. But it's
heavily narrative based around failure and a degree of support, as opposed to something that's freely given.
Quite, means tested in a way that I think was quite discriminatory.
Yeah,
and non-reflective of what this country's built on.
For sure.
But the one thing that I will say is that we think of income as money, and we don't think of anything in kind, right? So whether you have to forage or grow or shoot or kill something to live, or you go and wash dishes, both of those things require effort. So a UBI would not be without any sort of effort required. There would be something involved for you to get that. Now, I think if you think of this way, right, without meaningfulness, it's counterproductive. No one really will focus on being part of society if there's nothing meaningful to do. I don't think that we need to just be trapped in these like roles and positions that we just feel like we're part of the grind. Now, in Japan, it's honourable to perform a role or a task, irrespective of whether you're wiping the handrail at a train station or you're running Mitsubishi.
Yeah.
It's still afforded the same sort of respect. Unfortunately, in this society, it's not. And the reason why is because everything that we do is based on meritocracy and your deservedness. Have you earned it? Now, there are some people, I live with a child protection officer who visits families who've been generationally unemployed since the 60s. So when you're born into that, do you really have the same chance?
Yeah, fuck no. Of course
So,
not.
you know, are you thinking about are you going to be able to be worthy? Are you going to even go to school? Are you going to do anything that's going to get you and your family out of where you are?
It's a difficult line of thinking. I'm sorry to interrupt there. It's a difficult, and this is one of the things I think is at the heart of the conversational decay that we are experiencing right now in society is the fact that, so there's two things. There's a tension between two things that you just raised at that point. Number one, I think it's incredibly important that we all understand the role of individual agency and that everyone is taught that. But we also need to acknowledge the fact that things aren't fucking fair.
Yeah.
And that somebody who grows up in that sort of environment is not afforded the same opportunities as person who has grown up into even a working class, solid working class family where people have been employed. But we're told we have to choose a fucking narrative. We have to choose a side. We have to choose which one is it. You have to be the person, pull yourself up by your fucking bootstraps and make yourself something of it. And if you're not willing to, fuck off, I'm not listening to you. We've got to choose that one, or we've got to choose the softy lefty version of, well, we need to afford these people, people like this, and I think that it's okay to actually hold both of them at the same time, owning the tension, owning the contradiction, so that we can actually explore the problem in its entirety and give it the energy and its worth, because it's a really important thing you're raising.
In a merit-based society, there is an ideological barrier to support a UBI. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not going to give to someone, and the US is the preeminent place in the world where you find this. But if you look at it and say, well, hang on a second, the illusion of aspiration, we're actually all the same. We're coming at different rungs on the ladder. If I have to carve off 0.1% of my income collectively to bring someone up through the ranks, get them educated, teach them how to go to a dentist, go to a doctor, not vandalize anything, not end up in jail. If you look at the end result of all that investment, it's far less. The UBI is far less than the money spent on incarcerating people, on dealing with the legal proceedings, the health ramifications.
Yeah, the healthcare.
Australia currently spends, I think it was $2 billion incarcerating only Aboriginal people, not white people included, Aboriginal men at the moment. Now, we're throwing around figures and numbers that are just almost, they're obscene, right? But we all know that you have to invest in something and you have to preempt it to create a better outcome. And I do think that it would be fair to find some way, and I even think that actually some people in hospitality may require a form of UBI or subsidy like a JobKeeper to continue operating.
Do you think it's important? Do you think that,
good businesses, by the way.
Too big to fail, too important to fail. Do you think that there's certain hospitality businesses or certain hospitality segments or areas that require? I think we all require protection right now. I think the Australian government's not doing a terrible job, in my opinion, of that generalised support. mishandled and $60 billion out. Kenny fucking called it so quickly. Like, we were like 2 weeks in and he goes, by the way, there's a fucking $60 billion hole in what they're talking about. And I was like, really? He goes, yeah. And he spelled it out. And like 4 weeks later, it was like, oh yeah, there's a $60 billion hole. And it, but I
But it was so apparent. It was like the number of businesses they said, and the fact that when we all got it, when we finally got it, we all started paying tax on it. You're like,
hang on a minute.
This is another fucking PR stunt by the fucking. We spoke to Jake today about the idea of PR sort of like opaqueness is so fucking like that's one of the fucking dirtiest things you can ever do. Like if there's one thing we spoke about that idea of is there anything that's not corrupt? I don't know. Like if you can't trust your own government to give you true information, like what else? Like
post-truth. It's post-truth.
Like this, the whole 140 billion, just like throwing it around like it was like that was always going to happen, and then like let's not take like if there's another 60 billion sitting there. I don't know. It doesn't mean we have to get it because if we don't need it, we don't need it. Like, I'd rather not let's not raise taxes down the line to sort of pay for what we already fucking have. But
the valid point that 60 billion was already budgeted for, right?
Yes.
As a numerical error. I don't know. I've filled out the form myself. I don't know how someone didn't put the right figure in that box. It doesn't make sense. But anyway, it happened. But to think that they excluded people that could have been included in that total budgeting cost.
As in non-residents.
So, you think about, okay, why the fuck would you come back here and study? Why would you come back to Australia
it's a fucking
when
war.
you've got zero safety net, even though you've paid taxes, right? So with the JobKeeper tax payment coming out, you're only $104 ahead of someone on JobSeeker.
Yeah. And that's when I spoke to I had that conversation with Palissa on the phone, and she was saying like that the whole idea, because most of the foreign workers in hospitality are here doing bullshit like university courses to sort of keep them in the country, and they're paying like quadruple what a resident would pay plus taxes just to be. And then she I don't know if it's happening or not, but she told me about that idea of what they're proposing now, that when you're not studying, you can't work at all. So in summer holidays, like how do you survive that?
But they're totally disconnected from what drives this country.
Mm-hmm.
Immigration is going to be put behind 10 years now.
Yeah.
So it's going to be.
When you say behind, what do you mean by that?
Well, numbers. I mean.
Deloitte
Access Economics has predicted that we will take 10 years to get back to pre-COVID immigration levels, which will support the economy. So if you think about that favorite Vietnamese restaurant down the road that does everything so authentically, because everyone's from Vietnam.
Yeah.
Well, some of those people have to go home, and they're not coming back.
Do you think there's we've spoken a lot today about, just thinking about in the background there, we spoke a lot about the sort of humanistic nature and ego, selfishness, all these things sort of driving us to continue on the path that we are, and we've pointed out how quickly that can happen and how hard it is to unravel that stuff. But like nostalgia for people, nostalgia is that people like to think back to their childhood, like simpler times, especially people on their deathbeds, whatever, about like what true happiness actually meant. So it's in us to a degree, but only at certain points. Like, is that a level of hope that it is natural to human beings to want to, or to understand that sort of idea of kindness and helping is really a true part of life? Like, is there any, like maybe it's if we're talking evolution, maybe it's hundreds of years away, but is there a hope in the fact that it is a part of us? We only grasp it when we're in our most vulnerable state.
I think it's probably 100 years behind us, to be honest. Like, I think we've devolved from that position.
Yeah.
You can sense it when you go to certain places where, I was in Morocco 20 years ago and walked into a Medina and was motioned into a person's house with 4 kids, couple of cats, husband wasn't there, having a simple meal, and yet they invited me to share what they were eating. Nothing to offer, but a sense of inclusion and warmth and hospitality.
Yeah.
We've devolved from that position under the guise of the way the world's evolved under capitalism. And I think like the main thing to really think about is that we've all got it in us if we want to be that way. We just have to kind of really weigh up what the losses are, And I think money's a really hard thing to not think about, because we've been We've been conditioned to absolutely trample on someone else to get to a point where we feel secure, and they maybe not.
Is that why you walked away from your externally viewing it successful restaurant?
Well,
was that a part of it?
Crunching numbers, diminishing profits. Still being the lowest paid people in the building after 5 years.
Yeah.
And had great staff that deserved every cent that was spent on them. They really, when you think of when I think of the business, my business partners Katrina and Kirk, we decided to move our separate ways for numerous reasons, some personal, some professional. But at the end of the day,
my apologies to Kurt for the way I treated him the last time I dined it.
He'll never forget you. But essentially, we couldn't see the reward for the risk taken.
Yeah.
And so it was basically, do we go out now at a good point? On the hard work of each of us doing certain things within that business to make it what it was. And I look back now, I think probably a very good decision.
Do you feel like that if you had pushed on a little bit further? Sorry, do you feel like if you had pushed on a little bit further with that business, like I feel like Garage East was a real watershed moment for Tasmanian, not dining, but Tasmania and its kind of footprint in the psyche of what it could be for the rest of Australia. Garage East was there before Mona.
Yeah.
And I know David Walsh is a singular human being, but there's an element that Garage East breathed, Mona into existence. The fact that it could exist in a town. I grew up in Hobart. I fucking know what Hobart was capable of. And when I was growing up in Hobart, when I was growing up in Hobart, there's no fucking way. We didn't have a Garage East in Sydney. Yeah. We still don't. Yeah. We've got venues of the ilk, but we still don't have a Garage East that we own in our own right in Sydney, and you birthed it in Tasmania, in Hobart, and it's an interesting. Do you feel regret about walking away to the point where all of a sudden there's been an explosion and an appreciation of what I see is a lot of your hard work?
I'll tell you what I will say. Which goes back to the former discussion we had, but being a custodian of a space, being part of a timeline. We're not infinite. We can't live forever. So you have to accept that you are part of a process. And when you decide to leave it, you do for reasons at the time that are essential at the time. If we'd kept going, we would have had to find ways to, I guess, massage the business and the space and fit into the way things are going. Sure, we probably would have been busy for a long time to come, but we were at our frontier of managing it, of our exhaustion, of our energy, of our creativity, and also some people that have worked for us have gone on to do things that are still alive in Hobart. Yeah. So I feel that the diaspora is a great thing. It's been, if not, we are one crop in many crops. You know
Sorry, Kenny, you were going to jump in before.
I was going to ask.
Hey, listen, this is a good step for me. We do
so many things. We do so many things. We're like, take this talk. We're getting better. We're getting better. I was going to ask. That idea of, obviously the economics had a part to do with it, but you seem like someone who's fed very much through the soul as much as through the pocket, and the success of your restaurant. And Hobart as a sort of tourism destination, did that sort of transient crowd, did it become sort of less fulfilling, as in people was like, I wanted this thing I had last time, or I read this in a magazine, I wanted this, and people not really getting it, or being unfulfilled because they came in with a stupid expectation. Did that deteriorate, and sort of so every day when you were turning up 2-3 years in, you're like, fuck, I love this, it just sort of lost its magic?
It's a very good question, because in a place like Hobart, which relies on a lot of tourism, we set out to be a local restaurant, albeit not like any other local restaurant that had been there. We took the risk, and we thought that we could maybe influence or turn or work with the people who live in Hobart locally to come and try our thing. And someone said to me, look, your customers will change your business. And I said, no, That can't be possible. We have a very clear vision. But actually, it was very true. And it was from someone who'd had their business changed by customers themselves. So what we had
I'd
to
agree with that
become,
wholeheartedly.
what we had to
much.
become was this really liquid, fluid, sort of malleable form to capture as much of the custom that we could manage. Not we would have days where we'd open at 5, we'd have 100 people lining up outside the door, 46 seats. So when you're at the end of the line, we had a table for you at 10 p.m. and it's now 5:15. What are you going to do for 4 hours and 45 minutes in Hobart back in those days? No idea, but we did not expect that sort of Mate, we had no idea what was coming.
Go have a fucking beer and turn up, son.
Mate, we did 46 seats because our business plan, 46 a night was great. At full thrust, we're doing 160 a night, so 3.5 turns.
Fuck off.
Starting at 5 and finishing well after midnight. And using a lot of local produce that was not in abundant supply. So we had to go to a set menu after a couple of years to actually manage our product because we couldn't get enough. That's all changed now. There's a lot more around. But those sort of things really, after a while, you get people coming in and they're like, oh, it's just a bowl of peas with some cured pork in it. It's like, yeah, but
I had that dish.
They were in the field 4 hours ago.
Wow.
The sugars are still sugars. They're not starch. I mean, so I thought to myself, I can't do this en masse. Will Gleave, head chef, fantastic guy, brilliant cook, same belief, and so
you
really
can hardly say that's en masse. So and to give you a bit of perspective, in our business, what en masse is, serving 160 diners is the very worst day on record in any of our venues.
True, but if you're potting peas for 160
no,
people,
I'm not trying to make that. What I'm trying to say is that I agree, but what I love, what I've always loved, what I think is the most important part about what you achieved and the conversation that you were having between the diners and yourself was that you stretched yourself to a point that was, it's almost like the meal, no matter how delicious it inevitably was, the true journey was within the commitment from those creating it. There was a compact between the diner and the chef and the front of house staff, which is we are working to the end of our rope. We are taking ourselves to the degree, if we were to add one more element to this dish, it would not have been on the menu tonight.
Exactly.
Which is a very difficult thing, and also it's such a highly rare thing because I do not think that it's actually mirrored through most fine dining.
I had to learn that though. The temptation to go further was always there. And I didn't do it alone. I had people around me that were like, that doesn't need to be there. Oh yeah, you're right. But why did I put it there? This instinct. Like we're down there in Hobart on a quiet Wednesday night looking at what's happening in Sydney and Melbourne, wishing sometimes we had those customers there on some nights.
Yeah.
And what did we have to do to fit into the cohort of colleagues up on the Big Island? Well, sometimes I didn't realise it was just being ourselves. You know what I mean? And luckily I was surrounded by people who were saying, we can do something on our own here and just stick to it. You know what I mean? And I think that's what I respect in people who stick to their ideas and their perspectives and what drives them. Because it's very easily to be taken off course. And I was on numerous occasions just like, holy shit, where am I at? What's going on here? Why did I think this?
We had to end up here. It's one of the people I've seen, and I got off. You need to piss. 1 second. No, one second. Yeah, fuck you. Otherwise we have to tell it. No, fucking go then. I want to talk about Pierre Joncu when you get back.
Oh.
Just, Anyway, Kenny, I can talk. How are you, Kenny? We can edit this out or we can just leave his piss. I tell you what, Luke, there's going to be some fucking...
I'll follow you with the camera.
There's going to be some joy and gold.
I'm just taking a slash. How good is this?
The wine's amazing. I tell you what else is amazing is the company. It's a remarkably interesting perspective from someone, and a point of view from, and it's not that you don't expect it, because it's almost like you can't produce the restaurant or the food or the perspective or the context that he does through food without having such an ability to grapple and deal with issues that are really beyond most people's. It's not just their interests. Oh, sorry, it's not just their ability to wrestle with them, but their interest taps out. It's like, doesn't matter. Yeah, I might be smart enough to listen to it, but I'm just fucking not interested at all. It's been beautiful.
Yeah, it's inspiring to sort of read. I was thinking that someone like have such a short attention span, sitting with, in quietness, and just the way my mind works, to sit in quietness and like consuming books. And it's like, imagine that thing of just absorbing because I want information. Like I love reading, like sort of in this very what we spoke about, the spoiled technological age. Love finding out about stuff. I just want to get to the fucking source. It's like I want to get to that point that I really enjoy.
I feel like you'd really dig. I think if you were to find the right method or the right pathway to meditation, you would really thrive with it, because it's I think that one of the things that it kind of has kind of shown me over the last little while is like it's being able to not sit and read, but consume without distraction. Is that? Okay. I'll fuck off, Luke. There's no more fucking Pacalay, you cunt. We're just talking about meditation.
Oh, well, really?
Yeah. Do you meditate?
I haven't. I need to though.
You never have?
No, I haven't.
I was just saying to Kenny, we were talking about you and your absence, and we're just talking about how what a privilege it is to talk and to you and with you and Kenny was like Kenny did.
Obviously very well read, and I've always struggled to my mind just sort of races, and it's like that idea of just sitting down for an afternoon and just absorbing books. Like I struggle with that. Like I think about everything, because you got a joke that we always talk about this now, but going to the gym a lot now, and I'm the kind of person that when I know I've just got to do I'm saying I'm going to do a certain distance, whatever, I can't not look at the fucking odometer like all the time. Like I can't just be like, just keep doing it. It'll beep when you're done. I'm just like, how long have I done? I just not keep looking. Like I can't switch my brain off to sort of that idea of just, like that sort of war mode of just being like, just fucking get on with it. Like it's gonna happen. Just fucking get on with it.
It's
just
a
keep doing what you're doing.
Exercise.
Yeah.
It's this. You start off here, and that's your goal, and you count backwards to getting to that goal. And the whole, I guess, like I know what you mean, where like you know where you have to get. There's something in between. There's probably something painful or euphoric involved in that pursuit.
Yeah.
But your mind can't help but track that journey.
Yeah.
And keep following it.
Yeah.
You kind of, I don't think it's very, it's like that that old sort of psychological experiment where they basically asked subjects to not think of a certain animal.
Yeah, immediately.
But
boom.
people just could not take their mind away.
Of course,
from it.
yeah.
That's part of, I think, why we've evolved to be, rather clever and have so much potential, is because we have the ability to.
Well, there's an inbuilt trap.
Yeah.
So there's an inbuilt trap with it all. And I see that meditation provides an ability to kind of jailbreak it. Like it's a code breaking kind of.
Able to control your thought better, or just sort of disconnect, or how would you?
So the way that I've come to think about meditation and why it's been a positive in my life and why meditation practice. I don't practice every day. I have it in periods. but I've developed an ability to be able to drop in and out of a really mindful state. So Vipassana is the tradition within the Buddhist kind of religion, but now taught loosely as mindfulness, which has been co-opted by the fucking feel-good fucking fairy, put the fucking crystals underneath the moonlight bullshit. But the reality is it's just paying very close attention to your experience. And one of the things that becomes very apparent is intrusion of thought. And I kind of the most powerful and effective way that I've been exposed to is through an app, the Sam Harris's Waking Up app. And Sam Harris has got a lot to say on a lot of things in the world, but his contribution to meditation and the power will be, I promise you, his lasting legacy, and one that is worth every fucking moment. And he has this term which is lost in thought. And, it's something that we can all kind of go, I was just a bit lost in thought there. But there is a real state of human reality where we are consistently and evolutionary tied to being lost in thought. And it's done us fucking great. Our kind of obsession with the past and the future are what keep us safe. The future is planning, and the past is where were the berries good? Where was the bear? So there's a safety in being able to review the past, and without an ability to actually consume and conceptualize the future, you can't future-proof. You can't build a cabin. You can't store away food for a winter. You can't survive life. But what is lost in the midst of all of that is an ability to engage with the present. And one of the most powerful things that in this day of distraction, this day and age of distraction, is we are bombarded with so many things that literally hack our internal wiring to just arrest our attention to a degree that has never been touched. Like the last 10 years, it's not like doubled. It's fucking it's just to a degree of magnitude that I couldn't put a number to. Like, it's insane.
In every level,
what is competing for our attention, and also,
but the level of options.
But when you look at it when you look at it it's not just the level of options around like something like Netflix. It's was that the kind of old school thing of reviewing the past? Was that post okay? That person commented, and so there's this spiral of thinking around what our behavior's been in the past and the way that we will be perceived in the future that just divorces us from what is happening right now. And there is something that happens when you're able to pay attention to something like your breath or sounds, and the fact that they arrive, without any. We cannot help but hear. It's the same thing as soon as you learn to read, you can't help but decipher language. You cannot choose it anymore. And when you kind of can bury down on what is happening in a very specific moment through certain practices, something really powerful happens, and you become aware of the fact that that it is there is a non-dual sense to reality, where we are not it's not the object and the subject anymore. We are actually just here. And everything else is a complete narrative that is spun to keep us safe in some way, but it's also completely fucking false.
So hence the silence and the insecurity and the fear, which then converts to a sense of calm and, I guess, reason. If you think about like what you mentioned with the ability or how you learn to read, scientists have come to understand that the plasticity of the brain and our cognitive ability is really actually ongoing. So it doesn't cease at 25 or whatever it was. It's formed by everything around us.
100%.
So if you look at like the advent of the smartphone in particular, and you relate it to a child learning how to read, at first they see a letter and it's very slow and they try and piece it together, and all of a sudden it becomes very fluid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they become capable of managing that at a point where you actually say, okay, they've got it now. Well, as adults, we've had to approach that with other things like technology, where we learn to read again, and then we have parts of our brain manipulated and turned into spheres of only being able to operate in that realm. So when you lose something, you gain something, but the losses that we've had for the gains are not worth it in terms of technological interference. So, there's a lot more insecurity, a lot more anxiety, a lot more fear, because with other parts of our brains that aren't developing anymore. And meditation actually taps into that.
Mm-hmm. I just learned anxiety is a state, not an emotion. It's like fear is the cause, is the causation, and anxiety is the state. Anxiety. People talk about we have rising anxiety levels. If it's not, it's rising fear levels. It's unresolved. Anxiety is unresolved fear. It's not actually. It's not the same as joy or happiness. Anxiety is the outworking of fear, which is a very interesting thing when you kind of look at when someone says, I'm anxious about this. No.
Scared.
You're fearful of something that you're unable to fucking conceptualize clearly. And it serves itself as this generalized anxiety, around the world. Because, a lot of people, the difference between a phobia and an anxiety is a phobia is very specific. You're scared of spiders. There is a fear of spiders that's directive. Anxiety is so general. No one has an anxiety around flying. They just have anxiety. They have a phobia around flying. They have a fear of flying. They don't have an anxiety. And anxiety is the state that
it's
flying
a manifestation
brings.
of that fear. And that's why it's really hard to manage, because actually it's not founded on one fear, it's founded on many fears.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, it's an evolved state of fear, I suppose. Like, I don't know if you watched that Explain thing on Netflix. There's one on anxiety and that. And they're like 16 minutes long to get to the point and bash it out. But like they talk about the anxiety, that's been measured in animals who have very far fewer ways of coping with situations than humans do in terms of like their brain capacity. Like animals are fearful of most things. Like if it's not, you just have to go near an animal, and it's the level of anxiety that goes through animals, and that's it's almost like a hangover in the human's evolution of when you're fearful of something just to get. And now we're fearful of talking in front of people. Like no one's really walking around anxious about getting murdered. It's like you're anxious about being in large groups, like people looking at you, people judging you, like you're not getting enough fucking likes on Instagram or something. Like it's become a really finite, really, really, I don't know. Like we're in such an evolved state of it, and with people talking about it so much, when we've probably never had less to be anxious of or fearful of to a degree. I don't know.
It doesn't take much to feed it. I think it's a modern phenomenon. It's just topping the glass up, because we're looking at long-term issues that have caused that.
Does fear breed fear? Like now that it's on the table and it's an open thing, it's like it's okay for me to be at. Well, I think you nailed it when you say people judge it as a feeling, not as linked to something else.
They think the anxiety is the thing that they need to fix, without investigating what the fear is.
Yes.
And at its core, I text Lukey on, some of the things that I was interested in talking about today with him. And, one of the things was the interplay of Maslow's kind of hierarchy of needs. And, at its basis is kind of the fear of annihilation, the fear of being destroyed, the fear of non-existence, the fear of death is the reason why his hierarchy of needs is built on, which is, all around survival, shelter, et cetera, and out of after kind of like food and shelter and comes community. And what's interesting to me is, it's not interesting. It's interesting if you're fucking not a dumb bum, but it's no surprise to me the fact that at a time of just the death of community and of culture and of I've never sounded so conservative, but of and I'm not talking traditional family, I'm just talking family here, not traditional, but family values, whatever they are. But just the fact that a family is at the core of it, no matter what shape or form they take. When these things are kind of removed, it's not a surprise when community is removed that all of a sudden there's a rising sense of anxiety, because at the core of an unresolved anxiety I believe it is a fear of annihilation, a fear of separation, and a fear of you might live 80 fucking years, but you might have a fucking terrible time doing it because right around the corner, or even whilst you're living, you're basically you're divorced from what is so important, which is a sense of belonging.
I mean, you know, is there a difference between 80 years of anxiety, pressure, depression, worry, or 30 years of flight, fight, anxiety?
No. Well, life is short, brutish, and
it's just an extended and elongated version of a similar, even chemical function in your body.
Yeah.
I can't remember, was it John Locke, the philosopher, who said, you know, life is short and brutish. I can't remember. But you know, but now it's long and brutish.
Yeah.
You know, it's fucking horrid, but it doesn't need to be. But the reason I text you that is because I wonder around one of the things that Kenny and I have spoken quite deeply about, or extensively. I wouldn't deign to call our conversations deep, but you know, we've spoken in length over the last few months around where we see the future of hospitality and the venues that will the operators that will last, and our kind of where we've landed is those that have community at their core will be the ones that are the most fit. How do you feel about that statement?
I think it even outside of Sydney's cities like Sydney and Melbourne, that actually has even more truth to it, because Sydney and Melbourne are really big cities, and there are communities within communities and subsets and all the rest of it. But in a place like Hobart, you know, the community might be a 50, 60 kilometre radius, but we all really, really rely on each other for vegetables, for skills, for swapping or trading things that we produce.
Emotional fortitude.
Yeah, we're going to each other's businesses and learning and I guess interacting and stuff like that. But I mean, community is a very loosely used word these days, and sometimes it's more geographical when it should be much more, I guess, emotional and psychological and spiritual. So when I look at the future of the industry, I think maybe taking the word industry out of that is probably the best way to do it, because in hospitality it includes people who a single mother of two that makes milkshakes at Wendy's, or the sous chef at a 3-hat restaurant in Melbourne.
Or the farmer.
They fall into the same sort of cohort, and they're very, very different. Their lives are very different. Their communities are very different. So my thoughts are that the industry itself has to sort of separate itself into different cohorts and stratify itself so that it has different levels of requirement. So, you know, if you want to just go and toast sandwiches at a cafe and you have no other aspirations in life except that, and you play in a band or you're an artist or whatever, you fit into a certain management of that realm. Now, if you want to take your career all the way to the top and you want to do long hours and work in 3 stars or 3 hats or whatever, they've got to be separated out, and there's different needs within those different strata. And I think that to actually, regulate to a certain degree how many businesses are allowed to open, the level of training required to go into it, because as a result of this crisis, and even what was coming before, we're looking at a huge cohort of underemployment and lack of training. Now, if I had a restaurant,
it was already an issue we're leading into.
Already going to, right?
A fucking nightmare.
This is just basically, cut it off at the knees. But, if you, for instance, had a restaurant and some colleagues decided to shut up shop, are you going to take on apprentices, or are you going to take your colleagues on who've run businesses, who'll turn up to work, who'll do their section, get paid, even contribute in a certain way, and make your life much easier? You're not going to take the trainee. You're not going to go through that whole process, no matter what the government throws at you. So we're looking at a very, very critical point of what I had, someone willing to take a chance on me to train and learn and find my way, being greatly diminished. And this is going to have a huge effect on the industry in 20, 25 years' time.
Yeah.
If you look at Neil Perry retiring this week and what he could do.
What did you make of that? Like, I'm such a pessimist when it comes to... I love Neil Perry so much, but I just read between the lines, he's no longer welcome at Quantum because he loses money because he's actually a great human who believes in real ethics and morals to, like, when it comes to his venues. I don't know anything about... Kenny read a fucking comment. He goes, the guy's a legend. He was all about the pussy and cocaine in the 80s. I was like, so I don't know about those morals and ethics, that side of him at all. But the limited amount... No, we could all agree he's been a force for good in our industry, right?
I mean, I think what Neil did was never going to fit into private equity.
No.
It wasn't.
How does hospitality fit in private equity?
It doesn't, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
External investment has augmented this industry to the point that it's a bubble that's going to blow.
So
if you don't run off your own steam, you're in big trouble.
Well, you know, one of our business partners, shout out to our boy Reno, he'd be very happy to hear that because, the reality is so much of the hospitality industry is built on the idea that it's either run by, wild-eyed idealists, who are and romantics who are chasing down their own version of hell by running a restaurant, but on their own
self-flagellation.
Yeah, fucking right. Or there's people who are trying to start the 15 people who tried to fucking do the new Shake Shack in Australia.
Yeah,
and one of them will fucking still the most fit will still fucking fail. But his point, our friend and business partner, I said the word beautiful. He's not beautiful. He's a man. He's an interesting man. No, it's anyway. They need to actually self-actualize. They need to be energy within themselves. Building a business within hospitality to prop a fucking EBIT number to get a fucking sale to private equity always results in failure. Always. For every Shake Shack, you have a rock pool group.
Yeah.
Which, no disrespect to Neil at fucking all. That man is we went and sought out his counsel several times over our career and we've never worked for the man. But the reality is that you cannot force his vision and why he is important into a fucking private equity situation.
I mean, you can't put it in the same group as a Lauenbrow, Keller, and all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's basically they're trying to stratify a market.
Yeah.
But at the top end of it, they're not willing to toe the line that he
created.
So
he's one of the people creating it.
The principles and the ideals behind that. I mean, and also as well, the thing is, Neil may have ended up as a bus driver if it wasn't for the chance that he had in the industry.
And pussy and cocaine. His thirst
bus
for pussy and
probably
cocaine.
Still find that. But
it's I
reckon bus drivers drive around thinking of pussy, but I'm not sure they can afford the cocaine.
Well.
It's a Christmas trip.
There might be a courier, But if you look at it, like, the Neils and the Tetsuyas and the Yanni Karitzis and all these people had a chance that isn't going to be available anymore. It's not there.
See, I agree going
and that's
forward.
A really sad thing.
One of the saddest things that I see is the fact that I feel like Kenny and I are actually one of the last people to get to get an opportunity. In the sense, you had it, you've done it, you're already a part of it. You make your mark, and you will continue to make your mark, Luke. But Luke Burgess minus 15 years, very unlikely. Jake and Kenny minus 15 years, very fucking unlikely. That we get the same opportunity, the same platform afforded to us. Now I think that we get to carry that forward. I truly believe that we do, and we're seeing it, but. There comes a weight and a responsibility, which is one of the reasons why we've started doing this podcast. This is not easy for us to take for any of our friends and any of the musicians and the cooks and restaurateurs we have on the podcast. But the reality is, we've got to tell the story as it stands. We've got to fucking have the stories told as they stand right now. Otherwise, we run a risk of just working ourselves into a position where all of a sudden we turn around and it's all gone. It's all done. And the young people aren't interested, and the young people don't have an opportunity because there's a monopoly had. It's something it terrifies me is our role in creating trend and therefore monopoly, our expansion, in and of itself, isn't a nasty thing, but it also deprives other young voices. Every venue that we open deprives another young voice. And it's something I raised with David Chang. I kind of fucking jumped out of a bathroom after just doing a massive line of coke at a party last year. I went, David, what do you think about the fact that every time you open a restaurant, you crush the fucking dreams of a young restaurateur? And he went, well, nice to see you, Jake, and fucked up. but the fucking, it's something that really concerns me. It concerns me in my role and my ongoing role in it. And it's something that needs to be wrestled
having
with.
that conversation about what was the original moment of inspiration and how you dealt with it. And, it used to be fighting to keep the doors open. Now it's trying to fight to maintain that integrity and a level of personality in your city. Like, Sydney's been pasteurized multiple times by different things. Yeah. And if we were just getting somewhere, like the Lord Mayor and Gladys and everyone were just sort of opening up their, whether it's legacy politics or not, you'll never know. But it's they were just opening up the doors to sort of allow a bit of personality back in, and then this is hit. So like, I don't know, a lot of the young ones just who are like had the biggest personality on the high street, I don't know if they'll be able to open their doors after like post JobKeeper, because it's it's not like they were making bank, they were just sort of realizing a dream.
Well, I mean, if you look at like a possible model and you say, going forward, I don't think there's going to be that much of a decline in people who want to open food or beverage businesses. It's just it's too enticing. Yeah. So what you're going to look at is, okay, let's follow.
Can't see what's enticing, but from inside, from inside, it doesn't look enticing at all. Stay the fuck away, you dickhead.
But if you look at Japan for a reference, that you
what? Sorry,
Japan, you can set up a very small place, run it yourself, pay yourself well, and do what you want to do for your limited amount of customers. But there's one thing now that's a problem, and that's the spacing. The spacing.
Yeah.
So the intimate spaces where you could actually give an experience and not just feed or water someone, give them an experience in a very sort of focused way, you're now limited by what is a health issue and restrictions around a health issue. Now, if we have to, I won't say socially, but spatially distance ourselves for the next 5 years, like if you don't have a 600 square meter venue or a 400 square meter venue,
you're fucked.
But even then, it's got to be one of those venues with good rent.
Yeah. And
the staff. So everyone's going to be working equally as hard with less staff and less customers. What's the point?
I talked to a friend of mine, he's a musician, and he sold out a night in 15 minutes here, and then a second night in another 15 minutes. And I called him, I said, 15 minutes, Philip? And he called me straight back and he goes, Jakey, I'm working twice as hard for a quarter of the money. and I laughed and I said, and he goes, and I'm working. He's like, but he's just so incredibly happy to be working. But I think that is it comes down to the one of the important things that we've been talking on all night is the role of worth, and all of a sudden the metrics for what our actual worth. Like everyone's worth took a bath. And whether or not, like you're sitting there and you took 60% pay cut or 30% pay cut, whatever the average was through this period, everyone was like, "Yeah, I'll do it to keep my job." 3 months ago, you want to do what? You want me to work twice as hard for 30% less? Go fuck yourself. How dare you kill the union? Now it's all of a sudden, oh, hang on a second. And I don't know. There is a striking interplay and something I've not thought in any way deeply about, but where what causes the breakdown? Why is it so easy for people to kind of go, oh, hang on a second, yeah, I will do exactly what you want me to do. I'll take 30% less for twice the work.
There's a real weight to what's made that happen. There's a huge weight to it, and it's we as business owners, you can't see it as you wouldn't look at it as a bad thing. But in terms of people's motivation and productivity, and it's, what inspires people to do good things is like you have to work hard, you have to do all these things, and and there can be a real apathy around, what you do for a day, because people don't give a fuck as much as you do. And it's that sort of, it's in any essence, whether like economic and whatever else you want, it's been a real leveler, because everyone's motivation has become really sort of brought into line. And that's not a bad place to be. It's a little tiny piece of communism within the sort of capitalist world that we live. It's like, we're all going to work for less, but we're all doing it together, and we're all going to work harder than we were. Like the teams that have formed, like we've sort of split managers, moved to other venues, whatever, but the teams that have formed, like some of the greatest we've ever had.
They're bulletproof almost.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, you've got to look at it from this perspective as well.
Do I?
That
Convince me, motherfucker.
There's no long-term prosperity in that.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So, like, even if, the business takes a hit and the staff takes a hit, at the end of the day, that 1% is creating a larger wedge with the rest of us.
Yeah.
And I think, like, it's still capital versus labor, and a lot more laborers, not as much work, capital with all the power. Like, they want us to squabble and unite together. But at the end of the day, as a business owner in this period, it's very hard if you actually care about your staff.
Yeah.
Because you're being forced to make economic decisions because of a health crisis. And so many things must be going. I think
that was the shittiest part of the whole the government's response, was the fact that they put JobKeeper on our doorstep. They basically they kept the unemployment numbers off their books
100%
at the cost to the individual. Now you can go, it's overrun. Genius. Suddenly it was being overrun, and it was going to cause then we got money to people. It wasn't about that. The problem and what happened, and we did it, because we're fucking good.
But how much work was it? Mate,
I tell you what, mate.
Like,
just trying to figure out the fucking rules was like half the battle.
But all of that, like, I think that was unfair. It should have just they should have handled it. The most difficult part of all of it for me was the fact that there was no acknowledgement of the fact that I was going to have to apply market economic rationale to a social welfare program in my own backyard. I had to do it to my people who I had fucking numbers, names, and fucking personalities attached to it. And we made the very difficult decision to not bring people back on JobKeeper unless there was an actual job. So what that meant was, Mary's Newtown, there was X amount of people who still had, like, we were open, we traded through. Mary's Underground in the CBD, no one around. We did not bring someone back on JobKeeper until we actually reopened that venue and we had an actual physical job.
Yeah.
We did that for two main reasons. Number one was an acknowledgement of the fact that we are not the government, and this is not a social welfare program, and we are not. And the second one was a very economic, rational response. We cannot afford to do this. And if we are actually considering what our role is in our commitment to our staff, it's being responsible for their ongoing employment, which means we've got to make very difficult decisions around it now.
Well, think about it this way as well. The government basically, like you said, 100% put it all on you guys and everyone else like that. What it should have been instead of JobKeeper. Obviously, it was work
Scotty
that wasn't
for
going to be
marketing
done, right? But it should have been basically, we are paying you to not gather together and not spread this disease payment. That's what it is.
For sure.
Yeah. So why was it managed in a way that it left certain people out, included only others? Like, it still has the paradigm of a neoliberal mindset.
100% it does.
It's not about health. It's a fucking health issue. So let's make it about that. Let's pay you to stay away and keep this disease, which is highly communicable, away from everyone. And don't put on the business to be sicarios, assassins to their own staff.
Yeah.
At that point, the disease was highly unknown. No one
is highly unknown now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I think what's going to happen is that you're going to have to. The government is going to get to September, and really have to say, "Wow, you know what? Like, yeah, okay, let's finish JobKeeper, and let's just go to a form of UBI-based job seeker where there's no jobs to be sought,
It'd be great if there was somebody or a voice that was able to communicate. I think UBI already has the stench of an unwinnable argument for some reason. There's something about the term.
It's ideologically confronting.
It is, and I think that for example, in Australia, you've just nailed it. We already have a UBI. Mm-hmm. It's just an inherently racist,
non-universal,
non-universal. But and for someone to call on it requires a level of it requires a level of degradation on their behalf. They had to degrade themselves to a degree and say, I am without work. I am, which is a fucking horrible place to start.
I am not worthy.
But the payment is still there. So the payment comes at a term. It comes with a set of terms that if we remove the set of terms and just made the payment available to people who do you want water? Oh, fuck off, mate. Drink some whiskey. If we remove the terms and made the payment available without the stigma, it's basically.
But let's really think about this deeply, okay? We've got.
I thought we were dealing with surface issues thus far.
As you pour Jack Daniels, I'm sure it's
No, that's
half a bottle deep. I'll have a splash too, thanks.
Yes, you will.
But I mean, let's face it, full employment is impossible. It's never going to happen.
Of course,
right? So we have to already be thinking.
If there's full employment, basically what you have is a national version of Garage Easts. People trying to produce things that they can't fuck. Their mouths cash and their Instagrams cash and checks their R's can't fucking cash.
Full employment means mostly underemployment and exploitation.
For sure.
And it still means that the wealth is not filtered down. There's no trickle down. None of that bullshit's going to happen. Yeah. But I think if we start getting our heads around now the fact that at certain points in people's lives, they're going to need some assistance from a government. And what the problem is that, we've made it incredibly punitive and dehumanizing to seek assistance. But the main thing is that as citizens and our embracing of debt in the last 80 years, particularly in the last 40, we have come to mistake personal debt as being the same as sovereign debt. And it's not.
Yes.
When you print money and you have the resources and you project the wealth of the nation on the next 100, 200, 500 years of wealth creation, it's not the same as you getting a $30,000 credit card or me getting a $900,000 mortgage. There's no time limit on the repayment for that.
Yeah.
Right? So you're talking about, you look out the window and the trees, they're real. They're not abstract. Money is abstract. When the trees are burning and we can't till the soil for food and there's no water to drink, all of the stuff that's abstract doesn't fucking matter anymore. And we've got to start moving towards respecting the real, the evident, and the actual physical. And we only have to regard the abstract, the financial system, and the irrationality of it as being some way to support that and keep that in balance. So, people don't have to work. It's not essential to the survival of this planet. It's essential to a system that we have been born into and that we've actually been ingrained to believe in. And it's built on inconspicuous consumption and mindlessness. And so we've got to start thinking of it as, okay, so-and-so needs payments for the rest of their life to not fucking burn places down or rob people or kill someone. Fair enough. And they might actually do something good for the environment or the community. Mm-hmm. And, there has to be a cap on the fact that CEOs, companies can't buy their shares back and inflate their prices of their shares. And when it comes to a crisis, cry poor because they spend all their money and get the government to bail them out. I mean, it's completely rotten to the core and it needs to be disassembled and re-engineered to suit actually what the planet needs. We've worn our time out. We're now we're at the existential threshold.
Living in liquidation.
We're insolvent.
So insolvent, yeah.
We're insolvent, and if you think about stuff like care, right? If you were to pay women for the history of care they provided to society, it would bankrupt the global economy several times over.
Yeah.
And that's never factored into any equation. That comes into the cheap care argument. You know what I mean? And we're all beneficiaries of that. Even the people who are victims. It's a bizarre mindset. But I mean, this is we can get super intense and sort of deep into this sort of stuff. But I think we actually have to start thinking about it more and more, because it's not, this is not a a dress rehearsal. This is the real thing. You know what I mean?
This is it. We're stuck in the middle of a moment that is fucking real. This is your words. This is not a dress rehearsal. There's no dry run. This is your life, and we get it once. We get it once. I think of a lot that one of the major things that people miss in their ability to make themselves accountable to their own existence. There needs to be an accountability that runs alongside to the freedom of existence. We have a freedom to create, to a degree. We were talking earlier about our acknowledgement of a lack of free will, but let's talk about perhaps we could phrase it as the illusion of freedom. But there's not an illusion of an accountability to. If you're going to acknowledge a level of freedom, you have to acknowledge a level of accountability for it. And I feel like we haven't been. I feel like everyone's been running at things going, yeah, whatever. What's on fucking net? Oh, Black Lives Matter. Yeah, what's on Netflix? Yeah. What's Dave Chappelle got to say about Netflix? Which was a powerful fucking statement from him. But at the same time, it was on fucking Netflix.
And it's pop culture. It's pop culture. Let's really address, I was at a gathering on Sunday in Ulladulla.
I love it, the fact I hang out, he has gatherings.
Well, I say gatherings because it was a group of people who kind of knew each other, but it was at a person's property in Ulladulla
I've heard about these, mate.
Heavily affected by the fire.
Okay.
They were burnt out, actually.
I'm trying to make a joke. He's like, they're heavily burnt out by the fire.
Indigenous sort of elder, so thanks, Jake.
Classic Smythe.
Yeah, that's so good.
And there was this sort of round circle sort of, welcome to country and sort of tell us a bit about yourselves. We'll tell you a bit about ourselves and whatnot. But the one thing that really took me, sort of the guilt really kicked in was when Noel said, "Oh, look, you tried to learn from us, and we learnt from you." And I thought, shit, what the hell have we given to the Indigenous population of this country for them to say we learnt from you? And it wasn't, we learnt to run or we learnt to disengage. There was still hope of interaction that we totally extinguished. And I think
we continue to extinguish.
I think that what's really interesting is that based on the conversations we had in that circle, there was nothing but a positive future in their eyes with all the injustice.
Do you see that as inherently naive, knowing what you know or knowing what we've discussed today, and tonight? I don't. My answer is that no, it's not naive. It's incredibly inspiring. But there's an argument for the fact that there's a naivety to it.
The premise of being unaware, the naivety. I can honestly say that in all of my years at school and into early adulthood, the only Indigenous interaction we had was basically we knew about Everleigh Street, we knew about Terra Nullius, Eddie Mabo. One of the first girls I dated worked for ANTAR, or Australians for Native Title Recognition. And beyond that, it was just complete whiteout. And it's interesting because I'm really interested in history and reading stuff, books like Dark Emu and whatnot. You realize wow, there's so much. We were actually stolen from the possibility of engaging with our history in a duality that respected both cultures.
Did you read the Bill Gammage's the biggest estate or the world's biggest estate? I felt it.
I haven't.
I tell you, it's like the 800-page version of Dark Emu. It's and I'm about halfway through and I've given up twice. It's like fucking War and Peace to me. It's fascinating, but it's dense and very it's history, which is fucking complicated
And long.
it's unashamed about actually dealing with it. There's something that Kenny and I do talk about quite a lot, which is as in the last couple of weeks is that a lot of the problems, it seems to me, arise from the fact that the oversimplification of very complicated issues. So, for example, history, where people, there's a whiteout, as you say, which is for me, it's not just a lie, but there's an oversimplification. And then when people kind of come back and say, well, it's a whiteout, and then all of a sudden it's trying to get rid of every white moment from a historical conversation. And it's like, well, hang on a second. What are you talking about? Like history involved everyone, and everyone to actually get a proper sense of where we are right now. Every voice, no matter negative, positive, right, wrong, aside, the only way you can view it through the lens of history is dispassionately, and with some sort of a lens of appraisal where you're going to go, this is what happened. But when you're trying to get rid of one of the voices, which we've done to a fucking terrifyingly, incredibly
systematical
degree when it comes to erasing black history from our own culture. It's, I do not know anything about anything, but just in our backyard, what a powerful job we have done of erasing, the history of Indigenous in Australia.
Yeah, it's almost like the Bible. Like the world started at this time.
Yeah. But the danger is when the pendulum swings and we start talking about black history in the way that it needs to. All of a sudden, for some reason there's a corner of the conversation that tries to take out the white element to it too, which is so fucking dangerous because this is the way that we don't learn from the fucking problems that history elucidates.
To add to that, I heard a brilliant argument by an Aboriginal academic who said, look, Captain Cook's statue in Hyde Park, let's not tear it down. Let's not get rid of it. Let's go put it in a museum.
Yeah,
sure.
Because as I walk through the park, that is an affront to my culture, the fear, the anxiety, and it's also a way of reimposing long-term pain. So if you put it in a museum, you say, okay, we're consigning it to the annals of history, but also as well, we forget that the Aboriginals have their stories of Cook as well. So we're only allowing it to be our narrative. You put it in a museum, you give both sides of the ledger.
100%.
And you have.
Can you imagine World War II without Holocaust museums? Why do they exist? They exist to teach a fucking very valuable lesson, which is that we need to be reminded of fucking daily.
That's what I read this morning. The news 100%. It was because it's all in America. It's very much about tearing the statues down, and Obama addressed it a couple of years ago, and saying that just put it all in a museum. No one's trying to say this shit didn't happen. Like proposing it in a celebratory manner is not okay. Like I think everyone agree that's not the right thing. But don't forget it.
Yeah,
like, put it in a museum so we can learn. Who's this?
Go fuck yourself. Whoever this is.
We gotta go. I think.
Yeah, we gotta go in a sec. But I know we
got to do the music thing up front now.
What's that?
You guys do this thing. The empty room sessions. We have a band come and play. Like we're
going to do another hour podcast after this. You cunt.
Yeah, we've got to do it with the band too.
This has been. Can I?
We'll stop talking.
Look, we're at just over 2 hours 10 minutes, and may I just say that it's felt like a walk in the park to talk to you. It's always a pleasure. It's a rare pleasure to actually just spend this amount of time speaking to anybody on any topic, let alone somebody who is as enlightened, informed, interesting, and embedded with some level of empathy and kindness that would take the time out to talk to anyone about. So I honestly cannot
really
fucking thank you enough for spending this moment with us, and
There's few people in our industry as insight, and even like you've not like you've removed, you're in and out of it, but it's as insightful or as I don't know, like has such poise around the state of the world, and you're not judgmental. You're not you're never preaching to anyone like this is all fucked and this is what you fucking should be doing. It's I just want to back up Jake's sentiment. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you both for having me on, and I think also that I enjoy talking about these things, and I think I've had the luxury and the fortunate position to sit around a table and talk about this quite often.
Yeah,
maybe even every night over dinner for hours. And there's so much that can be spoken about. It's very hard to bring it together. But I think like these sort of conversations, you leave feeling enriched. You feel that you've had your knowledge augmented and
things to pursue.
Grown. And also I think like this is what we're meant to do. This is one example of what we as humans are meant to do. And this sort of communication, the verbal, is something that goes back a long, long way. And I think there's certain things you can read every day that you don't quite remember, but what you hear sometimes leaves an indelible mark and pushes you forward. So thank you very much.
No, will you promise us one thing?
What?
When the world gets dark, will you come and talk to us, please?
Because you can lock me in this room forever.
Yeah.
Until the batteries run out, because I'll be solar powered.
As it turns out, there's a radiator that your legs are connected to. So,
I'm from Tassie. I don't know that.
Well, Mr. Luke Burgess, thank you so much. We're in your debt. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, mate.